Alright guys, so today's video is actually something really special. The team over at Dehancer reached out to me at the beginning of this month and asked if I wanted to make a video about their plugin for DaVinci Resolve. They do offer this plugin for Final Cut Pro and Adobe Premiere, but I edit everything inside of DaVinci, so that's what we're going to be going over today. They aren't paying me anything, nor do they tell me anything to say about their product. Everything in this video is strictly my opinion, but they did offer me a 10% discount code for you guys to use, which I'll have linked down in the description. So if you want to pick up this plugin for yourself, definitely go check that out so you can get a discount. All right, so one more quick thing before we hop into Resolve and I start going over how to use Dehancer. I just want to talk about the camera that I film on currently as well as my lens. As of right now in 2024, it's the Sony A7S III with the 24-105G lens. I shoot everything in PP8, which means that I'm using S-Log3. That gives you the most dynamic range out of this camera, and it's what I suggest using if you have a Sony camera that can shoot in 10-bit. But yeah, let's hop into Resolve and go over how to use Dehancer. All right, so now that we're inside of DaVinci, I'm just gonna go over the node tree that we're gonna be using in tandem with Dehancer. The footage that we're gonna be using today is actually from a video that I posted on Valentine's Day. I'll have it linked somewhere on the screen and in the description. So after you're done watching this, make sure you go check that out, but let's get started. So the first two nodes are gonna be for our exposure and our white balance. Then we have a vignette node with an outside node that's going to be used to bring up the brightness of the middle. Then we have two parallel nodes, one for keying out the skin if we need to make any corrections to the skin, and then one for our whites / her eyes. Following that, we have a tone curve, and then finally we have the Dehancer node. So if we search for Dehancer, we can apply it right here to this node. And you're gonna notice right away we don't have a CST, and that's because inside of Dehancer, we can actually convert our footage to Rec709 using this choose camera option. Now they do give you a Rec709, Rec 2020, Apple Gamma 2.0, Aces CCT, which is actually really nice. I do a lot of work inside of the Aces pipeline, DaVinci Wide Gamut, Cineon Film Log, and then choose camera. Choose camera is what we're gonna be using. So it gives you the option to choose your vendor. I use a Sony, like I said earlier. They have pretty much every Sony camera out right now, including the FX6, FX30, and FX3. So that's really nice. I shoot on the A7S III, like I said, and then you can choose your format. So they have S-Log2, S-Log3, S-Gamut3, S-Log3, S-Gamut3.cine. I use S-Log3, S-Gamut3, and then right away, our footage is gonna look really, really good. I'm actually a super huge fan of how this conversion works more than the regular one built into DaVinci. I think that the profile that Dehancer built for the A7S III and pretty much every other camera they have available inside of their plugin just looks really good and looks a little bit better than what DaVinci offers with their color space transform. So if we go down here, we're going to go straight to our print, and we're going to change this to Kodak Endura Glossy Paper because I'm going to be using a film print that isn't really meant for video. It's actually going to be Cinestill 800T. Dehancer actually put in pretty much every single film stock there is out. They have pretty much every single Fuji print, every single Kodak print, including some of my favorites like Kodak Gold, Portra 400, and Portra 800. Then they have some more interesting ones like Lomachrome and these Polaroid ones. But like I said, we're gonna be using Cinestill 800T. So when we apply that and then hit enable, it's gonna kind of crush our footage. You can see down here in our scopes, but that's really not the biggest deal because we're gonna be able to recover that really easily. Now, one thing I don't wanna forget is inside of Dehancer, if you know anything about film photography, you'll know that some people like to push or pull their film stocks, meaning they either underexpose it or overexpose it, and by doing so, they're able to get a different look with their film stock than what it normally should look like. Now, I'm not the biggest fan of this. I normally just like to leave my film stocks, what they should be, but I know some people really like the way Portra 400 pushed looks or Kodak Gold 200 pushed looks, but for today, we're just gonna be leaving it at 0. But the fact that you have the option is still really, really cool. So to bring back the information on our blacks, we're gonna go over to the expand tab and we're going to drag our black point down. And you're gonna notice that it's lifting up the bottom part of our RGB parade. And that's just kind of bringing back the information going on in her hair that was lost and back here. And it's super easy, super quick. So if we were to disable this, you can see it's getting a little bit more crushed, and then we re-enable it, looks pretty good. Now I also want to bring down our highlights and our whites So I'm just going to bring up the white point, and that's going to drag down our highlights. Somewhere around there looks pretty good to me. Now, if we go into the print tab, first thing I want to do is add color density. So film is known for having very rich colors, and they're not actually overly saturated if you look at them. They're really just dense. So this color density slider is going to emulate that. You can drag it up quite a bit, somewhere around here. Looks good to me for this clip. And then I'm going to bump up the exposure as well. Somewhere around here looks pretty good to me. And then we're going to use this tonal contrast slider to just add a little bit more contrast to our footage. Now this is really strong, so instead of using this little dot right here to pull it back and forth, I'm just going to grab the numbers and pull it up slowly, somewhere around 2 to 1.5. I think it's going to look good. Yeah, that looks good to me. Now I did skip over the exposure compensation, temperature comp, tint comp, and defringe in the input. That's because I don't really use exposure, temperature, or tint because I just don't really like how they work, to be honest. The exposure slider kind of only affects the bright areas of the image, which is slightly annoying, but it is useful if you're trying to pop those areas out. And then temperature and tint pretty much work exactly the same as these two sliders right here. So the only thing I really use here is defringe, and that actually works really, really well, but we aren't having any defringing issues in this clip. So now if we go back down here, what we're going to want to do is click on color head, and these top three, if we enable this, acts pretty similar to if we were to unlink our curves down here and drag, it down, adding cyan, or pulling it this way and adding red. It goes the same for green. This adds magenta, this adds green, and then this adds blue, and this adds yellow when you pull it down. So if we go into here, I found that these sliders work quite a bit better than the tone curve because you're able to make more granular changes by pulling on the numbers. So what I'm going to do is slightly increase the blue that's going on back here by just bringing this up ever so slightly. Somewhere around there looks good to me. If we were to disable it, you can kind of see we have more yellow going on, and now that yellow is gone. I'm really happy with how this looks. One thing that I don't really use a ton, but it is nice to have, you're able to affect the shadow tones and the mid-tones as well as the highlight tones. Now, these can be used for like color grading purposes. I normally will set up a separate node for look adjustments and do things in my lift, gamma, and gain. But if you want to do everything inside of Dehancer, these sliders are really good at that. And then if you want to decrease the total impact of what's going on inside of this tab, you can just use the impact slider, and that's going to affect that. Now, I did skip over the film developer and the film compression. So we'll go over film compression first, then we'll go over to film developer because I actually want to use the color boost. But for film compression, this pretty much just flattens out the highlights. So if we enable this here, it's going to recreate that really nice roll off that you get with film. I don't normally use this, to be honest, but it does work really well. For this situation, I kind of want to leave these bright poppy neon lights going on in the background because this was shot in an arcade. So we're just going to leave the film compression alone, and I'm going to head over to film developer and enable it. What we're going to do inside of the film developer is, I feel like this image is slightly lacking a bit of color, and now I don't want to add saturation, and I don't really want to add any more color density since we've already added so much. So one thing that you can do to bring a little bit more life to your footage is by using the color boost slider. So if we bring this up just slightly, you can see we're just adding a little bit more life to our colors. Now this can be overdone really easily, or you can just pretty much pull all the color out of your image. If I just bring that back to where it was, it looks really, really good. And if we disable it, you can really see the difference here in her face and these blues back here when we re-enable it. It's just adding a little bit more life to that red light going on as well as the blues back here. So now let's head over to the film grain, probably everyone's favorite part of film. What I've found, to be honest, with Dehancer is the 50 ISO films look really good. So when we enable this here, it looks really, really good. It's honestly just a tad bit strong, but it's not as strong as the 250 ISO or the 500 ISO film grains. I find these to be a little bit overkill. So I normally stick to the ISO 50 film grains. We're choosing 16mm because that's honestly my favorite. And then I'm gonna dial it back just to in between somewhere of 15 and 20. I think 19 is gonna look good for this clip, so that looks pretty good. If we zoom in here, I'm happy with it. Now let's jump down to halation. For halation, you get this really cool feature called mask mode. And what it does is pretty much highlight the areas where the halation is being applied. So we can see right here, it's being applied to her shoulder, a little bit of her hair, pretty much all of her hair, but it's pretty light up in here and over here. So if we aren't happy with how much halation is being applied, you can choose the no remjet mode, and it's gonna pretty much put halation everywhere. It's kind of overkill, so you really have to dial back how much you want this. So I think setting this somewhere around here is gonna look good. And when we undo it, we can see there's some nice halation going on right here. We got some going around her whole head and her hair, and then we got a little bit right on her cheek, and it looks really, really nice. So if we were to disable it, our image looks like this. Now we re-enable it, it looks like that. Now heading over to bloom, let's select 16mm and enable it. Go to mask mode, pull it all the way up so that you can see everything going on, and then just dial it back slightly, somewhere around here. Your 66 is gonna look good. So if we were to disable it, here's what it looks like without bloom, and then here's what it looks like with bloom. Now here's no halation and no bloom, here's just bloom, and then here's both again. I really like how this looks, and I think it's giving us a really nice, like dreamy, glowy, filmic feel to our footage. Now, these next three effects that I'm about to go over, I don't really use all that much. The first one being film damage. If I were to play through this clip with it enabled, you're gonna see some of these artifacts pop up. And honestly, I find them to be quite distracting, but if you're going for a more stylized look, this does a really good job of emulating dust and scratches that you would find on actual film as it's running through a projector. But like I said, it's a little bit too distracting for me and my work most of the time, so I'm just gonna disable it. Same thing goes for film breath. Like I said, you're able to push and pull film stocks, and that has to do with how much you're exposing or underexposing them. So when you're shooting videos on film, a lot of the time you're dealing with changing lighting conditions, meaning there's gonna be changes in your exposure. And because of that, there's gonna be shifts in the color. So what film breath does is it's emulating that shift in color. So if we enable it and then play through the clip, there's gonna be little changes going on in the background and stuff on her face. And I just also find it quite distracting, and it's something that kind of takes away from the viewing experience, in my opinion, for most of my projects. But this works really, really well for stylized projects. Now let's move on to Gateweave. Gateweave is supposed to simulate kind of like that shake that you would get as film is going through a projector. So if we were to play this, it's gonna be a little bit shaky. I honestly don't notice it all that much, so I tend to leave it alone. And when you do enable it, you are gonna see this slight little crop on your footage. I just don't really notice much happening when I'm using Gateweave, so I generally leave it alone. Not to say that any of these three are bad, they just aren't specifically my taste. Now, if we move on to Overscan, these are basically just film border overlays. We'll run through them all really quick. They all look really, really good, and just like the previous three effects, they're pretty much meant for more stylized looks, so not something that I use a whole ton of. But if you want to create something that's really stylized and really sells those film characteristics, I would suggest using all four of these. It's going to work really well in tandem with the bloom, halation, and film grain. Now for vignette, I also don't really use this. As you can see, I have a vignette node with an outside node paired with it right here. Now I'll show you what I do for a vignette normally. I do a power window, and we're going to put it around her face, extend it, and then make the softness really, really soft and flip it inside out. Then we'll go into our curves and just set a point right here and drag down. That looks like a pretty good vignette to me. Now we'll go into the outside node, click on these three dots, click editable spines, and then drag this up and bring it back. And then we're gonna pull it out this way again until we get just a nice pop on her face. That looks pretty good. Now, since she's a girl, I'm also gonna do this. We're gonna bring down the mid-tone detail to just make sure her skin is looking really, really soft and smooth. That's something you should always do when you're shooting videos of women. They like having really soft and smooth skin, and this is a good way to do that. Now I'm just gonna track the vignette really quick. Okay, so now it's tracked to her face. And if we disable it, you can see it's creating a really nice soft vignette going around on the outside, and it's also popping her face out quite a bit. Now, if we disable this and go back into the Dehancer node and enable the vignette, you'll see that we have to determine where it's being placed using these X and Y values. And honestly, that's the main reason why I don't use this. I find it to be quite tedious to set the X and Y values right to where you want it. And you also can't pop out the center of your vignette using the curves tab like I do here. So I generally just don't use this. I think it creates a really nice vignette, but it's just too tedious to move around, and it's also lacking the ability to pop out your subject in the middle. Now if we go into the monitor tab, this is probably one of the coolest parts of Dehancer. You are able to use false color. So it's gonna put this little scale right on your footage with you, and it's gonna tell you exactly what's going on. So we can see that her skin tones are in the perfect place according to this graph, and that these whites back here are not totally blown out. We can also tell that this is kind of really, really dark, and we might be losing some information over here, but in general, we're pretty much not losing any information in this image, which is really nice to see. And I find this to be super useful when I'm just starting out on a project. I'll usually turn this on to make sure I got my exposure right and I don't need to, bring up certain parts or reduce certain parts of my footage so that it's all balanced. And then it's also really, really good for at the end of grades to make sure that you're not losing any detail in your footage at all. So let's disable that. They also have a clipping indication. I've enabled this before, but I didn't really notice anything, so I think that means I wasn't having any clipping in my footage. So you guys can enable that if you do happen to pick up Dehancer, and let me know what this does, because I just haven't been able to get anything to pop up when grading my footage. If we go into output now, you can decrease the total impact of this node. So say you're doing something with just a Kodak 2383 film print, and let's disable this, and it's just way too strong. What you can do is go down into total impact and just bring it down until you get to somewhere where you like. So something like 60 looks good. And yeah, you can just kind of move on from there. I'm gonna reset this back to 100 and then put this back to Kodak Endura glossy paper and re-enable Cinestill 800T. But that's one way you can use the output tab to control your looks. Now, something that's really, really cool that they did with this plugin was incorporating a LUT generator. I've used this quite a bit this month, and I've created a few LUTs, and they all look really good. Something that I didn't expect is that it's not just creating the LUT with the information going on inside of the Dehancer plugin, it's actually incorporating everything that's going on in these nodes prior to it. I have no idea how the Dehancer team was able to do that, but they did, and it works amazing. Lastly, here down in options, we have the ability to adjust the quality of the plugin. So I always have it set to high. I don't notice anything changing when it's on normal or high, but because I edit on a Mac Studio, I just set it to high, and I know my computer can handle it. But if you're having some issues with it set to high, just go back to normal and you're literally not gonna notice any differences. Now, we've only done changes in the Dehancer node and in the vignette, and look at the image we've been able to create. It literally is insane. Like, this is such a good all-around plugin, and you can basically just grade your entire clip using Dehancer. But now I'm gonna go in and make a few more changes in the exposure and balance node as well as the tone curve to kind of just give this look a little bit more life. So I'm gonna go down into our gain, I'm gonna bring up our scopes here, and I'm just gonna pull it down to create a nice roll off. Somewhere around here looks pretty good to me, and we're gonna bring up our midtones. Somewhere around 10 looks good, and then we'll just slightly bring down our lift. And then I'm gonna add a little bit of contrast using this slider. We can honestly bump our midtones down just a bit and bring up our lift. And then we'll bring up our gain just a little bit. So something like that looks pretty good. And then if we're looking at the scopes here, everything is pretty balanced. We have just a little bit of red dominance going on, but that's because we have this red light shining on her face, and then as well as the blue going on back here. So honestly, I'm not going to make any changes in the white balance of our image. And then her skin looks really, really good. So nothing's going to be changed there. As well as if we go over here and just kind of put the dropper over the whites, we can see that it's sitting on the scopes right in where that white area is. Now for the tone curve, I do something a little bit different. I don't just create a normal S curve. I like to bring it up and then set a point right here to create a flat line. And then I'm going to create a third point right here and pull it back to its original spot. Then we're going to bring this top one down, set it to its original spot. And then honestly, I'm going to bring this up a little bit more. So somewhere right around here looks good to me. And then I'm going to set one more in the middle, and we're just going to play around with it until we get something that we like. So something like that looks good to me. And if we were to disable all of these nodes, we went from this to this. It's a little bit more dramatic. I like how it looks, but just the Dehancer changes look really good. And I honestly would be happy with either of these results if I was a client who asked for a film look on my footage. So I really think that Dehancer is just an amazing all-around plugin. It does so many things so well, and it also just creates that film look with such precise accuracy. I honestly don't have much bad to say about it, other than the issues with the vignette. Like, if they could find a way to incorporate a power window into the vignette effect, I would most definitely be using that. But until then, I'm just going to stick with the general power window method that I use right now. I hope you found this helpful. Like I said, I really, really love this plugin. And if you guys are interested in getting it yourself, make sure you use the discount code that I have in the description. It's going to get you 10% off. And Dehancer is a little bit more on the pricier side, so getting that 10% off is really, really nice. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you go follow me on Instagram @FlynnOnFilm, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.